Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a live chat. I'll be speaking with Erlend, I'll let him introduce himself to you if you don't know him, from Tochnyi and the wonderful work that they do as just a fantastic cornerstone of data collection, analysis, reporting, and with the desire to do things as accurately and truthfully as possible, which is kind of what we stand for here as well at ATP Geopolitics. Erlend, as he usually at Tochnyi, when they do their live streams, they don't show their faces, kind of operational security and whatnot and other things. But so he's not, you will see his avatar, and we should have German aid to Ukraine coming along and joining us in a wee while when he gets back from work. But Erlend, that's enough preamble. Thank you so much for joining us. Lots to talk about today. But you want to just give the audience that don't know you a little bit of an introduction to who you are and how you've come to be so supportive of Ukraine and the work you do.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, and for inviting me to the stream. So yeah, I'm 34 from Oslo, Norway. Have a background in the Norwegian army. Spent a few years in the cold, but as you can see in the avatar there, it's me with my little fella back behind me. Yeah, well, the reason why I was interested in Ukraine all the way from 2014 is because I studied politics as well, and always been very interested in politics, was active in politics in my youth, and then also that together with a military conflict, of course, brought my attention to Ukraine. And I was looking at the conflict already in 2014, the Maidan movement, everything around it. And I was also watching with very much attention what happened militarily in 2014, and I was very frustrated back then, and even more frustrated in 2022. So yeah, been engaged in various activities to try and help Ukraine, both a little bit in politics through an NGO here in Norway, and also then I was lucky enough to befriend a lot of the people behind Tochnyi 2 years ago now. I think next weekend is the 2 years since we had the first space on Twitter, which then became a podcast. So we've been doing this for 2 years now. Lots of different people that are interested in either open source intelligence, analysis, and also just trying to bring accurate news and reporting from Ukraine, and also try and focus on Ukrainians and Ukrainian culture. So there's a little bit of everything in Tochnyi. We're not just doing military analysis and stuff like that. We have some people doing economy analysis. Ben has been doing some really good reporting about the Russian sovereign wealth fund and how it's been depleting over the years of the war. So yeah, lots of different things. And yeah, our aim when we started Tochnyi was to also do some academic research and post them on the website. And Daniele was the first guy who actually took that thread up and started posting stuff. So
yeah, it's a shame that Daniele was unable to make this live, but hopefully we'll hook up with him soon. We were supposed to speak ages ago about Italy's fairly woeful contribution to the war hitherto, but we didn't get around to doing that. But nonetheless, yeah, Tochnyi are a fantastic organization. Go and support them. Go and join. Go and look at the work that they do on their website. but also on, I know you're not on Twitter anymore, only on Blue Sky, which is, you know, hats off to you, good choice. But Tochnyi are on Twitter and Blue Sky, go and follow them. Check out their, as I said, their YouTube channel. Also associated members like Brendan Kelly, who's still writing and doing stuff, and Andrew Perpetua and his team that we rely on so much here at ATP. The work that they do, absolutely fantastic. So, and you've been to Ukraine a number of times. In fact, you were there twice in January, helping to deliver these vehicles that I reported just today. In fact, I showed this Blue Sky post where you got Robert Magyar from his Magyar's Birds with 70 Norwegian provided vehicles from Fritz Ukraine. Do you want to just give us a quick indication of who they are and what you guys did?
Yeah, so, well, it's also very important to mention, and he says it in this video, that they collected half of the money and then we doubled it. So that's a model that Fritt Ukraina is doing, which means free Ukraine in Norwegian. And it's an NGO that was, it was born by two people, basically just getting a couple of vehicles down once, then understood that this has to be done more. And then it went into, it was set in system, and an NGO, formal NGO, nonprofit organization was founded, and it really rapidly took off. The NGO is now very, very large. If you pull up the website, you can probably see some of the stats that the organization has published there. And the organization is very lucky to have a number of sponsors in Norway that has contributed, and also lots of single donations. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see some of the stats. I think, yeah, that's the... Okay, you translated it. Great.
Yeah, it's the English one up there. I don't know. That's just the front page though, so I don't know about the stats.
It's on. If you press the logo, you'll find it. If you scroll a little bit down.
Oh right, yeah.
Yeah. So 59 convoys have been done. 26 pieces of uniforms or clothing, and
26,000. Yeah.
26,000. Yeah. 398 cars, etc. Yeah, so it's a pretty substantial NGO. I've only gone to 3 convoys, but there's an enormous amount of volunteers that are helping this organization, and then there's some fantastic people. Yeah,
is that a reflection of how close Norway is geographically to, and how much of a history that it has connected to, say, Eastern Europe, to Russia, as to why there is that much kind of desire to help Ukraine, as much as that organization indicates?
Well, I think obviously our closeness to Russia in the north does have an impact on the general support for Ukraine in Norway. There's a very high rate of, when there's been done polling about support for Ukraine, I think the majority by far of the population says that we should increase the support. And if we ask, like, the general question, should Norway support Ukraine with weapons and money for their fight, for their survival, then the rate is something close to 80% or something like that. So yes, I do think that plays in a bit, that we've, especially the older generation, the one that grew up before the 90s, they have a very strong feeling that Russia has always been a threat. Yeah.
And it's also, I mean, this is a subject I've talked about a number of times. Norway's in this very fortuitous position, or a bit of not just luck but foresight as well, that they've got the sovereign wealth fund, you've got the North Sea oil, where the UK decided to just let our corporations take the oil out and then occasionally we'll tax them, whereas the Norwegians are a bit more sensible and said, we're going to help ourselves because that's our land or our maritime area. So if you want to extract from that area, then we will take a cut in that. And that's built up the sovereign wealth fund over an awful long period of time. And it's all linked with oil as well. Obviously, it's linked to the extraction of the oil. And if the price of oil goes up, then the sovereign wealth fund gets richer, and that sovereign wealth fund then underwrites pensions and so on and so forth. So it's able to be used by the Norwegian government. Now, with the energy crisis that came about as a result of the war, the sovereign wealth fund in Norway, because of the price of oil going up, suddenly made an awful lot more money, or got a lot bigger. And so there are some people saying, look, the war, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has caused the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund to increase in value. Should we not just put that value that's been increased back into helping Ukraine? And so the present government had pressure on it by the opposition. They've then upped the budget for support for Ukraine for next year, next year, to a really significant number. But there are some saying, well, we can give even more because the sovereign wealth fund is doing that well. Are there any thoughts to add to that at all?
Well, yeah. So they more than doubled the floor. So it's not a budget; it's a minimum amount that will be donated in 2025. So the possibility is there that it can be increased, and definitely it should be. I mean, we're giving around $3.1 billion this year to Ukraine totally. That is quite a lot for a country with just 5 million citizens, but
that's incredible.
Still, it is a lot. But still, we morally, I mean, in my opinion, is we are obligated to give more, because we have earned hundreds of billions more on just the oil and gas income from Europe. So the thing is, what money can we give to Ukraine? It's not the oil fund or the sovereign wealth fund itself that should be given to Ukraine, in my opinion. We have plenty of money that is coming in before it's even inserted into the sovereign wealth fund. That would be more than enough to increase the spending this year by a very substantial amount. The technicalities of how this should be done isn't that important, in my opinion, though, because in the end, most of the money that we could increase in the spending shouldn't be spent in Norway. It should be spent in Ukraine.
Well, yeah, I had, and it's probably a really simplistic opinion, but my opinion was that Norway should help Ukraine by essentially replacing every single bit of kit Norway has to the newest bit of kit. Literally just go, right, Sovereign Wealth Fund is now going to upgrade the Norwegian armed forces to as good as they can the best stuff they can have, and then give all of your existing stuff to Ukraine. So literally it's a positive sum game where Norway is not just taking that money and giving stuff to Ukraine or buying stuff for Ukraine or investing in Ukraine's armed services, but you could also just make sure that your Norwegian armed forces have the best shit they possibly can. And then everything else that's being replaced just goes straight to Ukraine. I don't know how doable that is, but I thought that at least would be a positive sum game where both sides gain.
Yeah, it's not realistic though. But if it was up to me, I would give 50% at least of our CV90s to Ukraine right now, and buy completely new ones. So we can afford it. The CV90s are not being produced in Norway, so it shouldn't influence our inflation rate or anything like that. So that is a possibility. But in the end, our armed forces are so small. Our inventory is not that significant. Where we could help the most is really by funding weapons programs in Ukraine, and also going up and out in the open market, which Norway actually did today. They announced that we're spending $100 million,
$107 million, I think.
On air defense systems, buying it from the US, from the Foreign Military Sales Act. And I think probably that's munitions for Patriot or something like that.
It could be NASAMS, I guess, as well. Or I don't know if the Norwegians build them themselves, going to Königsberg or whoever.
No, we build the launchers and and FDs, the command posts, but the radars
the
are
missile,
American.
right? And the missiles themselves, they are like AIM 9Xs, so they will be American produced. So it could be that there's a lot of those missiles you could be.
But I don't think that's what we're buying, because that's already something that can go through other channels. When it's going through this specific program, I think it's something that Norway doesn't have. And not something in the Kongsberg system. Probably not.
Interesting. So before we go on to discuss kind of what's been going on the last 24 hours, I don't know if this is there seems to be a bit of a vociferous conversation in the live chat. I don't know if this is Noah is a bit of a troll, but nonetheless, this war can't go on forever. Ukraine isn't serious about going on the offensive to liberate the 1991 borders in the south. It's a bit of a ridiculous claim that no, they're not serious about militarily taking back the borders to the 1991 borders, the territory to the 1991 borders, because that's militarily impossible for them to do so. They don't have enough people. No one's saying that they are going to do that. How Ukraine wins the war is economically through people like the US, and we're going to talk about this, how important the US is for keeping sanctions on Russia, and if they suffer enough economically, then that might precipitate a collapse within Russia, and then that will get them to either have a regime change or not be able to continue to prosecute the war and voluntarily bring their troops back, and that will then allow Ukraine to militarily advance, or at least to take control of those territories. But I think it has to be done in line with an economic, if you like, battle or economic war that Ukraine win with the help of all their allies, and then an awful lot of missiles and drones, etc., etc. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine isn't winning this war by some sort of maneuver warfare marvel. We saw that clearly last or in the summer of 2023. That was a terrible mistake, both by the allies to push for it and plan for that, and encourage the Ukrainian military to do that kind of operation. And I think there is no one in their sane mind that would think something like that is going to be repeated again. But Ukraine is treating the Russians, both equipment-wise, as we can see on the daily reports from Andrew, and also from other OSINT people that are counting losses, and also the storages. The massive toll that this war has taken on just the material of the Russian armed forces is absolutely insane and not sustainable for Russia.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mention Andrew, because Andrew Perpetua and his team that count up, they do the mapping, very detailed analysis of the movements on the front line, but also count up all the lost equipment through every single day. And Andrew, in the past, was very much a doomer. Because truth is important, accuracy is important, and if Ukraine are having a really tough time, then he will let you know. But he's also, realistic about Russia's position, and of late he's been much more dooming about Russia, saying that I've seen the amount of stuff they're losing, and there's sort of activities that are being committed on the front line. What Russia are doing, and they're not in a great position themselves. Yes, they're grinding on and taking land, but my goodness, this cannot go on. And if the American boot is kept on the economic neck of Russia, and if Ukraine are consistently provided weaponry and equipment and can just about mobilize enough people, then actually Russia are in a fairly weak position themselves. So he's been quite bullish about Ukraine's chances. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I think everyone that has observed closely, like Andrew has, let's say the absolute insane increase also of the losses on the Russian armed forces, both equipment-wise, but also personnel-wise. And I think both are equally important, even though we think that Russia may have millions of people that they can send to the front lines in theory, maybe yes, but that is not going to happen, in my opinion. They are trying to recruit only by contract. by tempting them with incredible high bonuses. The bonuses have been just going up and up and up and up. But recruitment numbers are now going down, and they have been going down for a very long time already. I think Russia had their top around the end of 2023 on recruitment of contract soldiers, and since then it's been going down. The losses they have are far superior on personnel than what they're recruiting right now. And at some point that is also going to have a toll. And combine that with the lack of armored vehicles, the lack of fire support, which is going to happen at some point if the conflict is going to continue.
Well, we're hearing, sorry to interrupt, but the other day a Chris Owicki thread was reporting from Russians themselves saying that actually in one particular unit half of their howitzers can't fire, and it's not so much to do with the lack of artillery ammunition, although I'm sure that that's going to be something of an issue for the Russians too. It's to do with the maintenance and the trained personnel. They just don't have the attrition of the war over time has meant that they don't have the trained personnel to operate the howitzers, and the howitzers are therefore not being maintained and they're becoming inoperable. And as a result, as you say, they're not getting the fire support from their artillery that they had in spades at the beginning of the war.
Yeah, and all those factors are going to, in the end, cause the Russians to take even heavier losses on personnel that they're doing now, which is, if you look at the last 2 months, especially December and January, the losses were astronomical on personnel and not sustainable even for Russia. So in my opinion, the only way Ukraine can win this war is through attrition. There is a problem with that, though, because Ukraine also has manpower issues. It has equipment issues, although I do think that situation is actually improving on the Ukrainian side. Maybe not if we count tanks and IFVs so much, but if we count everything else that is a part of the logistics and equipment train that is needed to run an army, my impression is that every step of the ladder has been improving over the last 2 years, while on the other side, Russia has been getting worse and worse equipment, and I think that is going to at some point culminate the Russians. And if the culmination of the Russians calls them to basically give up and say really go into negotiations, right? Not like now where they're basically asking the favors of the US to force a negotiation, which are on terrible terms for Ukraine, but where they see that if we don't negotiate now, then we're actually in big trouble. That's when Ukraine should, in my opinion, start saying, yes, we really want to negotiate right now, because we see that we're in a strong position to at least secure our independence and get some sort of guarantees.
That's what Andrew was talking about the other day, saying at that point, that's when Ukraine should say, yeah, we'll negotiate. And then it takes 6 to 8 months for that to actually properly materialize. And in which time, that's when you put the pressure militarily on Russia, because they're the ones that saying, right, exactly, we're ready to negotiate, and they're in a weak position. They've culminated, and then you can actually have some military success there. Goose Princeton, thank you very much. Thank you, Erlend, and everyone at Tochnyi. You provide an excellent and serious resource that provides a much needed level of detail and analysis. And I would fully agree with this. One of his questions, quite a few from Goose Springsteen. I have little hope for the future EU-UK efforts generally. Recall the Maloney prank call when she privately stated Europe was tired of the war. The best hope is Poland viewing a secure Ukraine as an existential necessity for itself. Right, we're going to come on to this more broadly, Goose. So hopefully we'll kind of answer your or talk about your stuff there as we go through some of these topics here. So we're going to start with Anton Gerashenko saying tomorrow the annual Munich Security Conference will start. Munich will briefly become the global capital of diplomacy, but I think it's worthwhile to remember, especially right now, that Munich was also the site of one of the biggest diplomatic failures of the 20th century. It was in Munich in 1938 that UK and France signed an agreement with Germany and Italy to appease Hitler. The agreement is also known as the Munich Betrayal, and lots of people have been saying, the reason I'm starting this talk off with this is that people have been saying that yesterday's Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump statements were very much the Munich betrayal type of thing. It allowed Nazi Germany to annex the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, where many ethnic Germans had lived, the old kind of like speak German type thing. This decision was made without Czechoslovakia's participation, so without Ukraine's participation, and the country was forced to accept the terms to avoid war. The United Kingdom and France, pursuing a policy of appeasing Hitler, hoped to maintain peace in Europe. This only strengthened Germany's aggression, and in March 1939, it occupied all of Czechoslovakia and it launched World War II. The Munich Agreement became a symbol of the failure of diplomatic concessions to an aggressor. Hope these next crucial weeks will not go down in history as the same. And you know, this is a kind of idea that Trump's come out and said, you know, the US will continue providing aid. Yeah, and frankly, we will go as long as we have to, because we are not going to let the other happen. But right now, Putin wants peace. So you've had all this, okay, lots of things going on. So Trump coming out and saying that, and Hegseth saying that the Ukrainians will have to concede land. So already starting at the negotiations. So rather than starting with the maximal objective, they're starting like 2/3 of the way down, which is absolutely unacceptable. And then saying lots of weird things like in that kind of presser there, Trump said, oh, the Russians have fought hard over that land. They've lost lots of people, as if like the Ukrainians haven't done the same. But he seems very clearly on the side of Russia. And I pointed out yesterday, one of the most, or it might have been this morning, one of the most important things Trump has said is in this particular question and answer session, where he talked about how he didn't want to, he was going to continue to give aid to Ukraine because he didn't want Putin to be able to say he had won. So, and I'd like your thoughts on this, Erlend. So the idea that, and I said, that's arguably one of the single most important things we've heard Trump say. It's just a little comment, but I often say to my audience, you know, concentrate on the little things because they tell you an awful lot sometimes. And he said, and I'll try and get the actual, the sound, I have to do it differently. But he basically said, we will continue to help Ukraine. Not, he didn't say because it's the right thing to do, because it's strategically correct for the US, because we don't want Ukrainians to perish. We don't, you know, we want Ukraine to prevail. He said, we will continue to help Ukraine because I don't want Putin to be able to say he has won. It's more about this strong man's zero-sum game, that if Putin says he's won, then Trump's lost. He can't have Putin say he's won. So he doesn't care one jot, Trump, about the outcome for Ukraine. He cares about what a single dictator leader perceives of his own strength in the international standings. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that he is probably very affected by the people that he spoke last to. And
yes,
when he said that he had recently spoken to Zelensky, I believe, and when he now had the press conference and these truths that he sends out, then he had recently spoken to Putin, and I think that reflects very well into what he conveyed. And unfortunately, that's what we have to work with. In my opinion, anything. So, yes, there could be negotiations where Ukraine give away land. That is absolutely something that they can decide. I will not protest that. But it is an absolutely terrible precedent to set that Western countries, that Western countries accept this reality and basically impose it on Ukraine or any other country that is invaded. That is one of the most dangerous things that we can do as a Western hemisphere, is to accept these kind of things. And what I'm scared of is not that he is saying it alone. What I'm scared of is that leaders like Meloni, maybe Merz in the future, if he takes over the chancellorship in Germany, or other European leaders are falling into this domino of or some kind of domino effect of leaders that concede to this, and then basically accepts that if you invade a country, then as long as you fought hard for the territory that you conquered, you are entitled to it. And that is an incredibly dangerous position to have as a world leader.
I find it unconscionable, absolutely disgusting. Can you hear this?
So we're getting.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to play this 40 seconds here.
Security on our money. We're going to have it secured by. They have rare earth, and they have oil and gas, and they have a lot of other things. And
so there's several points to this. The first point is that everything that we've given to Ukraine, we're now going to ask payment for. So we've given you these nice Christmas presents. Now we're demanding that you give us your goods for these for this military aid, which is not to understand not to understand why the US gave aid to Ukraine in the first place. Why it's in their strategic interest. I don't think Trump understands the long game. I don't think he understands geopolitics. I think he thinks very much short term. And then he goes on to say this:
we're asking for security in our money.
So does it mean you are not sending any
They've
more
agreed to it. Ukraine has agreed to it.
Does it mean you are not sending any more aid to Ukraine?
No, we are, but we want it secured, and the money is going to be secured.
When will the U.S. stop sending funding? When will the U.S. stop sending?
Because if we didn't do that, then Putin would say he won.
So if we didn't send aid, that's what I'm saying. If we didn't send aid, he says, then Putin could say he'd won. Like if I was asked that question, say, how long will you send aid for? What happens if you don't send aid? I would say if we don't send aid, millions of Ukrainians will die. They'll be living under oppression. Europe will become unstable. The economy will become unstable. And as an American leader, an unstable and unsecure Europe is an unstable and insecure United States, and blah, blah, blah. I would do all of that talking before I even thought about the perception of whether Putin thinks he's winning or not. But for Trump, his go-to, why should we give aid to Ukraine, is otherwise Putin will get to say that he's won. That is what is driving Trump. So these little things, honestly, I will say it again, that's the single most important thing I've heard Trump say in the last ever about Ukraine, because I think it's freaking revealing.
Stop sending.
Because if we didn't do that, then Putin would say he won. We're the thing that's holding it back. And frankly, we'll go as long as we have to go, because we're not going to let the other happen. So
we will go for as long as we will let it go, because we can't let the other happen. The other happen is Putin saying he has won. So that is what's driving him. Putin's potential saying that he has won. I've just found that absolutely incredible. Sorry, I just had to go over that again.
Yeah, the thing is that he doesn't found any of the reasons for the U.S. aid to continue, and I must say I'm happy that he says that it is going to continue.
But I assume that would be the bare minimum, though.
Well, we'll see. I hope it's going to be some of these absolutely critical systems and munitions that we cannot procure and produce in Europe. Most of all, I do think though that Europe, I'm very confident that Europe could, if we want to, provide almost everything that Ukraine needs, except those critical systems like interceptors, munitions for HIMARS and M270, so that being GMLRS and ATACMS missiles. These sort of things, we're dependent on the US. We're also dependent on new deliveries of cruise missiles to Ukraine, because frankly, there are not going to be enough Scalp, EG, and Storm Shadows around. So yeah.
Do you know, and German aid to Ukraine has joined us, so awesome to have him on board. Do you know if Europe, because I find this a very, very important question, can Europe step into the gap that is left by the US? So you're saying certain things like Patriots, okay, maybe SAMPTs can do what Patriots do, but the lead time on getting those ordered and built and into Ukraine is just, that's impractical. So okay, Patriots, interceptors for those kind of systems, interceptors maybe for other systems, F-16 support maybe in some ways. But what do you know anything about satellite provision, like satellite imagery, radar planes, things like AWACS, and also what's going on with those Swedish radar planes? Why are we not seeing them? Do you know anything about whether we have the ability to completely replace American intelligence in that way?
Well, we cannot completely replace it, but I do think that we can provide most of those infrastructure systems that you just mentioned to Ukraine, to the degree that it wouldn't be a deal breaker for Ukraine in any way or form. I do also think that I know that Ukraine for the last year plus has been very, very careful in intelligence sharing with the US, and that's probably going to continue. So in many ways,
by careful, do you mean not sharing as much as the Americans would want?
Not sharing as much, and also not relying as much on American intelligence as they used to do in 2022 and in the beginning of 2023 and up until the massive failure in the summer. But I don't know. It's hard to say. I do think that Europe can. The problem is if Europe will. And that's been basically one of the key questions that we've been asking ourselves for the last 3 years.
And Germany to Ukraine, thanks for coming on. And, it's a good time to chip in because Germany appears to be one of the main supporters of Ukraine up to now in terms of the amount of stuff that has been both delivered and pledged going forward. But we're on a precipice of maybe a new future for Germany, with possibly the CDU taking the reins away from the coalition, the traffic lights coalition that was in charge of Germany. Now, CDU and Friedrich Merz they are supportive of Ukraine. Merz is very supportive of Ukraine indeed, but there are always going to be the AfD and maybe even BSW on the far left chomping at the bit to have aid to Ukraine minimized. What are your thoughts about how it's going to look going forward over the next couple of months?
So first of all, thanks for having me. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Beautiful.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I'm still a little bit sweating. I completely raced home as far as I could.
Naturally.
Yeah. Regarding your question, it's not that certain, I would say, regarding Germany, because we do know for sure, or very certain at least, that in terms of Taurus, for example, Friedrich Merz is completely in favor of delivering them to Ukraine. Nobody should think that Germany will now start to give like 1,000 cruise missiles. If that happens, certainly will be a very low 3-digit number at max. If he wins, and it looks like he wins, besides that, there's not real, like, he doesn't talk about like increasing assistance so much after the elections in case he wins. He always said that it is, or it would be better if Germany had, like from the beginning, from 2022, like directly sent much, much more to Ukraine. But right now, more the focus should be on achieving peace as fast as possible. He says the same as Scholz, like not go over Ukraine's heads. They need to be on the negotiating table. They need to say they're fine with all of that. But it's not like he goes out and says, I'm going to deliver 20 billion in military assistance every year. It's a lot of, I think he will be more of a stronger political supporter as Scholz, definitely. He will for sure deliver Taurus, but I'm not sure if he will do, besides Taurus and political support, more than Scholz, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for answering that. We'll go back to look at some of these topics that I have lined up. So here we go. This is the idea. Trump was talking about fighting the Russians fighting for the land and losing a lot of soldiers, and the implication was that therefore that they're not going to want to lose it. But of course, it's the Ukrainians' land, and they fought themselves. So absolutely, there's some insane stuff that Trump seems to just spitball with. When asked, "Do you see Ukraine as an equal participant?" Trump answered, "That's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. People are being killed. It's a bad war." He can't even answer that Ukraine is an equal participant in discussions over the future of, let me think, Ukraine. It just blows my mind. I always use my fake neighbor, Doris, poor old Doris, and use her as an example. As I said this morning, that's like me going around to Doris's house, smashing up her house and saying, by the way, I'm just going to have an arrangement with Derek, who lives across the road, and we're going to discuss how much of your house I'm going to get to keep. And by the way, you're not a part of that discussion, Doris. Like, that would be disgusting if that happened. And that's exactly what the US is proposing here. And Donald Trump is proposing, with then Pete Hegseth saying that, and by the way, security guarantees they won't be able to be part of NATO, and Europe's going to have to pick up the cost. Europe's going to have to provide the security guarantees, and the US will get to keep or help themselves to $500 billion worth of natural resources. It's absolutely insane. Have you guys got any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, the thing is, there is never going to be a European peace mission without NATO guarantees and the US support in Ukraine. That is in some way something I look at as a positive that they inserted, because it shows that they are not prepared for what is coming when they actually try to go into some sort of negotiations. Europe cannot field an army that is capable of doing such a mission. That is not possible. Not this year, not in 2 years, not in 3 years, maybe in 5 years. We're talking about a need of around 300,000 soldiers in the system all the time working to ensure that there is a fighting force of around 100 to maybe 150,000 men on the contested territories, or in proximity to the contested territories. Anything less than 100,000 is just a joke, and there is no way. If we get every single Western European country involved in a peace mission, we could maybe field 50,000, but I don't think we could sustain that for more than maybe 1 year.
Yeah, ends up being expensive. I mean, German aid, I believe the Bundestag would have to change the regulations in order to even have German peacekeepers in existence in a foreign land.
No, they don't have to change anything. As far as I know, they just need to give the approval. They have done this with countless missions. So far,
I stand corrected then.
Yeah, but maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. That wouldn't be an issue. The more bigger issue I see for the German Bundeswehr is where we get the troops. Not so much equipment, to be honest, and a lot of equipment which is working as dedicated to the Lithuanian brigade we are currently setting up. So yeah, I'm not doubting the numbers Erlend gave. I just wonder how many soldiers Germany could actually provide. I mean, we have soldiers, but we lack equipment, like, very hard. And Germany, as one of the biggest NATO participants in terms of economic strength, should have a relevant participation in the mission, right, compared to its economic strength. And yeah, that's the big issue I see.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought this was another shocker from Trump. The president of the United States just said, "God bless the people of Russia." If you're an American, that doesn't make you vomit in your mouth. You're beyond help. It is, yeah, just everything that seems to be said by Trump appears to be the sorts of things that Putin would want Trump to say. I don't think I've heard a single thing at the moment. So, previously we had Joe Biden calling Putin a pure thug and a murderous dictator, was it? And then we've never heard anything remotely like that from Trump. Adam Schiff, who's a Democrat, said today President Trump called our enemy Russia before calling our ally Ukraine. So this is what happened, the phone call to Putin over really Ukraine's head there. Meanwhile, his Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, ruled out a future for Ukraine in NATO and a restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty over its own lands. Let's not mince words about what this represents, a surrender of Ukraine's interests and our own even before negotiations begin. Trump's a great deal maker, all right, for the Kremlin. I mean, ouch, that is painful. So Anton Gerashenko then says 3 scenarios for a Trump-led settlement of the Russian war in Ukraine were outlined by Bloomberg. 1, base case, or the most likely scenario. The occupied territory will remain under de facto Russian control, with potential for limited land swaps for Kursk region. Ukraine's future will depend on the strength of the security guarantees, with NATO membership off the table. That will hinge upon the political will of future Western leaders. Europe will gradually take over the bulk of support for Ukraine from the US as they ramp up their military production. Best case, a strong commitment from both the US and the EU to intervene, or at least ramp up military support for Ukraine and intensify sanctions on Russia in case of another invasion. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense industry and recovery will receive substantial support to act as a deterrent against Russia. Ukraine could join the EU within the decade, strengthening its eastern flank. Obviously, that's not going to be very likely, is it? Worst case, Trump loses interest in Ukraine even before any settlement is reached, leaving it up to Europe to support Kyiv. Russia, meanwhile, could grow stronger and prepare a bigger attack, this time against a NATO member, given Washington's disinterest in the alliance and protecting Europe. And that's, Trump's Ukraine plans mean a $3 trillion bill for European allies. And that's a problem that no matter what, this is going to be very expensive for Europe. Europe's at a pretty fractious time. Money is fairly short in individual countries. We've come off the back of a pandemic that was very expensive, then an energy crisis that was very expensive, and economies that aren't doing particularly well. And this is at the time where, if Trump takes his foot off the Russian economic neck, then it's going to be very expensive for Europe to support Ukraine to the point where they can prevail. Any thoughts on any of that, guys?
Well, when it comes to this thing of the peace mission, I think that is kind of a deal breaker, anyways. What if you want to talk about that? I don't see it as realistic at all. Frankly, I see it as completely unserious.
So sorry, so just to understand what you mean. So because there's no, if Ukraine can't get into NATO, then it means you need security guarantees from Europe if the US aren't going to put boots on the ground. And you're saying that there will not be a peacekeeping force from Europe. That's a deal breaker. So therefore, there are no peace guarantees, which means you can't have peace.
Yes, and the thing is, we can leave out the question of how many people we can muster. But when you have the individual, let's say that these negotiations go into some sort of first phase, and then European countries are asked by Ukraine or the US to pull up their hands and say we're going to start looking into the possibilities of how many men we can muster. Then the individual intelligence agencies in those respective countries are going to be tasked with giving threat assessments to that mission. And that threat assessment will most certainly give some really concerning news to politicians in the European countries. One of the things that I'm almost certain is going to be in those threat assessment is that there will be manpower losses. People will die. And not necessarily because of active fire, which I think is also a very high risk scenario, which is likely to happen. But people will die because of mines. People will step on landmines, and we will have hundreds of people dying. No doubt whatsoever. And that is going to be in the threat assessment. And then you're going to have 2/3 of the countries in NATO, in Europe, just say, we're not going to participate. The next thing is the possibility that there will actually be some false flag events, or just angry, drunk Russian fascist soldiers that are suddenly being paid less because it's not an active war anymore, and it's not the SVO or special military operation anymore, or something like that. And they're angry because they don't get their Novorossiya, because they might be ideologically convinced that they need to take all of Ukraine, and etc. You have a number of situations where everything can go really bad and people will die. And I think that risk is going to be very high, and politicians will say, we're not going to participate in this. So I think there's absolutely zero chance that anything like this will happen. And without US guarantees, it's just unserious.
So in other words, what will happen is just the war will just go on until there is some other, either the capitulation of Ukraine or Russia, because there is no way. And this is why Zelensky's been, number one point of the victory plan was security guarantees, because if he doesn't get security guarantees, there's no point having peace. So just give Russia a chance to reconstitute and then attack again. We know they've done that. They break every treaty they sign, type thing. So there has to be a security guarantee, which means if you're not allowing Ukraine in NATO, you're scuppering every opportunity for this war to come to even a remotely satisfactory conclusion.
Well, there are some alternatives, and Zelensky tried to give us, I think he said 1,000 tomahawks. That is, some sort of security guarantee, but that's not going to happen.
Interesting, yeah.
Because Russia is not going to accept that.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Sherman-Aid? Anything to add?
Not really, no.
Well, Anton Gerashenko has some other kind of another analysis here, an analysis of the situation regarding the current state of the negotiations by Ukrainian expert Vadim Denisenko. The short version is impossibility of the new Yalta conference. Yalta conference being was in 1945, meeting the heads of governments of US, UK, and Soviet Union to discuss post-war reorganization of Germany. So similar sort of thing. One, Ukraine's key task, keep our state with as much territory as we can and access to the sea. Two, Russia breaking up was not considered by any party as part of the scenario. Without external help, breaking Russia up just by Ukrainian hands is impossible. Three, the basic task of negotiations and further actions is for the state of Ukraine to remain a subject, not an object. Really important that they need to be part of it, not people deciding over Ukraine. Negotiations outcomes will not be as much about territories as Ukraine being a subject on the whole. Territories won't have any meaning without that. And four, red lines are the key issue for Ukraine. They are not allowing our neutral status, not allowing a sharp decline in the number of Ukrainian armed forces, not allowing a ban on several military production areas and getting guarantees for supplies of certain weapon types. Regarding Russia, they are now not allowing them to remove certain types of sanctions. So here, I think I wonder whether the best chance for Ukraine to continue getting support from the US, at least, is that Russia demands such unrealistic things from Ukraine that the peace talks can't continue. But then it's whether the US blames Ukraine for not acceding to Russia's demands, or whether they would see Russia's demands as completely unrealistic and then say, right, in that case, we will keep supporting Ukraine. I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, these negotiations are going to start, right? They're going to do some meetings, etc. When the first one is going to happen, we're going to see massive shifts in the US position, in my opinion. Anything can happen after that. It's just that this specific plan that has been posted on the DoD website, you can go and read it there. It is completely unserious, and I don't see Ukraine even, wanting to participate in anything that has that as a template.
Yeah, well, and then you've got Pete Hegseth at the Ramstein Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting, talking about two things. One, NATO shifting in balance, and then talking about Ukraine. So you guys might be in a good position, being obviously European, to talk about particularly his first part on NATO and European security. Hegseth's comments about not tolerating imbalance and dependence are the logical outcome of Europeans having let NATO become a US protectorate rather than a true alliance through their free or cheap riding. Now, I disagree with Benjamin Tallis here. I don't think it's the Europeans being, and I talked about this at length the other day, this isn't like the Europeans free riding on the US. Like, purposefully. This is also the US wanting to take control for their own strategic benefits, having bases in Europe, springboards to elsewhere, but also giving them control over security of Europe, which gives them control over security of the US and economic trade, etc., etc. So it's not that that Europe has run around saying, oh, we don't want to pay for stuff, so can you pay for it all? It's been the US demanding that, and then Europe going, yeah, we're cool with that, because actually we can spend that money on welfare and building up, particularly post-war with the destruction of much of Europe. There's a lot of money needs to be concentrated on that. So in the Cold War period, yep, you concentrate on security, we'll concentrate on other expenditure, and that suited both sides. But now the US has said, right, we don't need to spend as much in Europe, so Europe does need to spend more. But I don't think this needs to be a blame thing, and if the US are going to recede from Europe and demand that we pick up the bill for the war in Ukraine, and we own this war, I wonder, and I'd be interested in your guys' thoughts on this, I wonder whether Europe will start saying to the US, okay, if you want us to own this, then, and you want us to stand on our own 2 feet from a national and international security perspective, you need to remove your bases from Germany. You need to remove your bases from Italy and Spain and the UK. Can you see that sort of situation ever happening? What would the impact of that have on, say, Germany? Obviously, there will be an economic impact actually from pulling people out. That's money coming into Germany. But if the US is serious about us stepping up, then we need to be serious about taking on that mantle and then moving the US on. If you don't want to be, if you don't want to spend your money and time and effort in securing Europe, then go away and we'll do it. Lots to discuss there.
Do you want to start, GAU?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I don't think that Friedrich Merz or Olaf Scholz or whoever is in charge would ever say, even when Trump is leading the US, you need to get your soldiers and get the fuck out. That's not going to happen. In fact, there will be, at least in the short term for the next couple of years, there will be even stronger cooperation on standoff weapons from the US here in Germany. So we shouldn't forget that. What I see problematic, because I understand both sides. I understand the US saying you need to do more, which is absolutely true. But I think that what Trump and everyone else in the US is always forgetting is, since at least 2024, Europe or the European NATO countries are actually doing more and more and more. I mean, a couple of years ago, when you look at how much or how many countries were achieving, for example, the 2% target of NATO, which is current right now, and compared to now, I mean, European NATO countries are contributing so much more to their own defense right now, let alone contributing to Ukraine's defense. I mean, we have seen from the key support tracker and from other sources that the US is doing a lot, that's true. But compared to Europe and the economic strength of Europe and how big our armies actually are, Europe is doing better right now than the US. The US provides key assistance, which is absolutely true, like Patriot interceptors, a lot of ammunition for HIMARS and the other variants, and all that kind of stuff. That's absolutely true. But when you compare Europe together, Europe is doing more than the US. And I think that the US, including Trump, always forgets about this, that this is not 2018 or 2017 anymore. And I think we need to find a way that he accepts this, or at least sees this and acknowledges this. And but we also need to make sure that we listen to what he says, because it's not completely false when he says you need to do more. I mean, 2% as a target in Germany, 4%, for example, can't be enough. It can't be enough that Germany in 2025, as of right now, only spends 4 billion euros per year, and at the biggest security challenge we faced after the Second World War. And I mean, Ukraine is how long away? Like 2 hours per flight, and we're spending 4 billion. That's both sides are right in this, and in my opinion, to end this, we should, both sides, the American arguments in America, or the US, the European arguments, we need to come together and work together, and that's the big issue.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Erlend. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think any European countries are going to ask the US to leave their bases, but they may scale down over time. That's what they've been signaling now. It's funny because up until now they've been scaling up, establishing bases in Finland, Norway, maybe Sweden, scaling up in Poland and Romania. That is very expensive to pull out, so I'm not sure it's going to happen very quickly. But it's really hard for Europe to face off the Russians alone now. If there is 3 to 5 years down the line a major threat of a Russian invasion of a NATO country, we really need to step up. We're not doing enough in Europe. Most countries are not scaling up to the degree that is needed to have a credible army and air force and navy that is needed to deter the Russians from doing something like this again. And that is probably something that we're going to have on our own cape in the future anyways. I don't see even a change in the US government in 4 years changing that in any way or form. So it is a huge betrayal, though, what Pete Hegseth said, because it implies, if you read between the lines, that they're not ready to come and defend every inch of NATO territory, as Biden was saying. And that is a huge concession, and also a big mic drop in NATO. The NATO military command is set up in a way where basically everything depends on the US command structure. And also we are completely dependent on the US logistics line and also their deterrence. So we will probably see a few countries trying to achieve or acquire nuclear weapons. I wouldn't be surprised if some European countries would go after nuclear weapons as well.
Yeah, lots of people have been talking about that.
I'm in favor of that because I'm not a fan of nuclear weapons at all. But unfortunately, in the situation we have, Russia has thousands of nuclear weapons, and Europe has a few hundred. And it just isn't going to be a credible deterrence when the US, at least for now, seems to not be willing to be that main deterrence, and also loudly claim that they are the defender when it comes to the nuclear deterrence of Europe. That is a very scary thing for me. So not sure how that's going to look like. Is it going to look like the UK and France building up their nuclear deterrence, or are countries like Poland, Finland going to pursue nuclear arms? Who knows? But I do think there are a lot of discussions going on in governments around in Europe now.
Goose Springsteen said, JP, your argument about Euro spending is flawed. Until 91, Euro militaries were independently credible forces. The British Army on the Rhine alone in the 80s is the same size as our whole army today. I mean, it's difficult to compare because things are much more expensive. You've got huge kind of pension costs. You've got, I think I was speaking to my mate and he was saying that there was a big change in the way they funded nuclear, and some of that used to be on the state and now it's all under the MOD in the UK and the defence budget, and that affects like how much we have available to spend and all sorts of stuff. And then moving over like our submarines, when you have these big expenditures moving to kind of new nuclear capable submarines, it takes up just a massive part of the defence budget. And my mate in the Navy, we're down a pub, but he was talking about it, just saying, yeah, you know, we spend an awful lot each year on defence, you know, compared to the rest of the world in the UK, but actually a lot of that, a big old chunk of that goes on these like huge things. and it doesn't leave you an awful lot less so left. So I think back then as well, like I don't, it's much more useful. We've seen this in the Nordic countries, and Erlend, you might be able to speak to this, which is we don't want independent, credible forces anymore because that's not very efficient. What we'd like is what the Nordic countries are doing, which is combining their air forces in a way that allows them to get greater capability by working together. It's a positive sum game. Otherwise, you don't want three separate abilities, within these countries to do all these three things, because it's almost always these countries going to be working together. So you might as well work together and get those efficiencies. So anyway, I'm going off on one, but the Nordic countries are making it looks like a good model to operate in an integrated fashion. Is that not right?
Yeah, and I think that what is unrealistic to see in Europe is that we will have massive standing armies like we had back in the Cold War. There are certainly going to be some fairly large armies. The UK is probably going to expand its army. Germany is expanding its army. Italy has a very large army, not maybe ready to to take on the challenges of modern warfare, but on paper it has a very large army, and we're going to have some of these expanding. But I think what we have to be relying on is a much larger reserve force. And I do think that the only way of achieving that for most European countries is to bring back conscript armies. And I don't understand why there's so much aversion to it. People are saying that it's stealing a year of youth, and we don't want to go back to when everyone was treated poorly and the training was bad. Yeah, we don't need to go back to that. We have completely fine conditions for soldiers in Norway that are conscripts, and actually people really want to go into the military and serve their conscript time, and not everyone actually can, because we have scaled down the military to such a degree that people of military age are in the excess of what the need is for the military. So we need to go back to having large reserves, and we need to train them regularly, and it doesn't need to cost that much money and take that much personnel out of civilian economy.
Absolutely. Just to finish what Benjamin Tallis was saying, the US also benefits a lot from NATO, but not at any price. US wants, and it has since the end of the Cold War, Europeans to also step up for our defense. Saying the US is not primarily focused on European security is obvious, as it's been for a long time due to the rise of China and a near-peer competitor and challenger in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, you could argue then that actually supporting Ukraine is dealing with China. On NATO and European security doesn't mean Europe will be abandoned by the US, including in nuclear terms, but that Europeans need to pay up and gun up, which we should be doing to be good allies and fundamentally to be able to protect ourselves. And seriously, it's a long time pass for that. On NATO and European security, again, this is not abandonment, though Trump's approach to Putin could also make this much more dangerous, and it should not drive strategic autonomy, Europe moving away from the US, which we still need and should want as an ally, but strategic agency and responsibility, a bit like kind of what Emmanuel Macron in France wants. On NATO and European security, so many in Europe, in Rome, Madrid, Berlin, London, Paris, Brussels, and elsewhere have so seriously let the side down on defense for so long. Europeans must now demand an end to this fecklessness and recklessness and demand real defense. I mean, that's very much blamey to me. I can understand why we paid less for defense, because you're living in times of peace and you make those decisions, which you can understand, which is actually this year we're going to rebuild all our schools or whatever, because you've got to answer to your electorate that are going to be putting pressure on you not to be spending on armed forces when you're not perceived to need them. Of course, armed force expenditure is an insurance policy. But when you're living on 4-year election cycles, not everyone is up for that. Now, with the US is a different kettle of fish, because they've had massive defense expenditure as part of their economy and in industrial strategy for the last 70 years, right? So it's just very different. For Europe and the US are in different situations. So I wouldn't wholly agree with the way that Talis has described that. I just really quickly want to go on to these Ukraine bits. On Ukraine, Hegseth ruling out NATO membership makes securing Ukraine much harder and likely more expensive, as Erlend has already said, but doesn't stop Europeans stepping up to do what they should have done anyway. But as Erlend said, that's going to be very difficult and unlikely to do that. Stepping in to secure Ukraine and secure ourselves, which starts in Ukraine. Yeah, okay, so on Ukraine, it was clear that the US would expect Europeans to put up the troops to secure any ceasefire deal, but that must mean Europeans insisting on having a major say in that deal if they are to go along with it. And that's a really good point. Look, if you want us to put troops on the ground, we need to be part of the negotiations. And Europeans must demand that any deal boosts and not undermines our security. This seems like the biggest danger, because claiming Ukraine getting back its territory is unrealistic. Not only sells the Ukrainians down the river, like the 1939 Munich did, but will reward and embolden Putin, like the 1938 Munich did for Hitler. Ukraine should not bargain to get US support at any price when it's clear that they are being sold down the river. Rather, Ukraine and willing European partners should formulate not only ceasefire terms that are acceptable to us, but also mutual defense. And just finally, I've lost where I am. Oh, here we are. Yes. So they must formulate mutual defense arrangements outside of Article 5 that give us the best chance of deterring Putin in the short to medium term, and then go like hell in the time this buys us to collectively and rapidly build the capabilities we need to fully defend ourselves, so on and so forth. Like, can we do that? Do you think, because European leaders are now coming out and reacting to what Trump said yesterday, and you've got Kaja Kallas coming out meeting with the Minister of Defense for Ukraine, Europe will stand firm and continue supporting Ukraine in their fight. You've got Europe can replace UAID funding, cannot replace it, but it does see an opportunity to boost visibility, according to Kaja Kallas. EU cannot fully replace it, but can certainly do something there. And then we've got the signing of this statement from the Weimar Plus group of nations coming out and actually saying what needs to be said, which is that a peace that guarantees the interests of Ukraine and the European interests as well. So putting Ukraine at the forefront of their statements, which is what Hegseth and Trump didn't do. So the Europeans are it seems, coming out and saying stuff at the moment. But do you think this is likely to, what's it going to look like? What do you think the outcome is for European support for Ukraine, guys?
I think there's a lot of confusion among a lot of European leaders, and frankly, also, unfortunately, don't think that a lot of them understands what is needed for peace guarantees. Realistically, how long do you think a peace mission is going to last? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? I think more like 20 to 50 years. And how can you say to Europe that we cannot have NATO Article 5 guarantees when we basically need to build bases and station tens of thousands of soldiers in Ukraine for decades?
I'm glad you said that, because I said earlier today that NATO Article 5 is much cheaper. Like, Ukraine being in NATO is the cheapest option, and I can't understand why people are not wanting Ukraine to accede to NATO.
Well, because Putin has that as a no-go. They will never accept it. So Trump.
But
okay.
But if they don't, if Putin doesn't accept it, so what?
Well, it's his buddy. Come on, I mean, Trump and Putin. They're buddies, And
there's nothing more that Putin can do, right? Because he's already at war with Ukraine. So if Ukraine then joined NATO, it's not like he would go, I'm not going to let you do that. It's like, no, well, it's not your choice. It's our choice. We've let them join NATO. Now, if you continue to attack Ukraine, NATO are going to get involved.
Yeah, and I do think that that's basically strategic defeat for Russia in the long
Yeah.
term. So they're never going to accept it. And with the Trump that we have today, that is basically treating Putin as a buddy, yes, he's going to demand stuff. He's going to continue to supply weapons to Ukraine so that he can get something from Russia. I don't know exactly what that is. Maybe that's something we don't know about that they've been talking about. Maybe Putin has promised very cheap oil forever. Who knows? But Trump wants to get something from Putin, and Putin cannot accept Ukraine being a part of NATO. I think that's probably the two main talking points that they have when they talk to each other. It's this whole peace deal that and negotiations, the way they went into it is dead at birth, in my opinion. But we might see a phase 2 of this, which is completely different, and it might actually end in some sort of peace negotiation that is realistic. I don't know how that's going to look like, but I am scared that it is going to be not very favorable, neither for Ukraine nor for Europe.
I wonder whether a kind of alternative NATO will be formed with the coalition of the willing, where you could have a kind of alternative NATO with an alternative Article 5, because, you know, Hungary, Slovakia, the US, if they're not going to allow Ukraine into NATO. Any thoughts, Germade?
No, not really. I mean, the whole situation with the peace talks, as Erlend just said, it's so confusing. And if that's all just, you know, just PR, and I mean, we shouldn't forget that Trump, as you yourself said, Jonathan, he's a deal maker. Maybe it's, or some of that is just to bring us, or to bring European countries to do more. And honestly, when he talks, or when someone from the US system talks, I listen, but I don't know what to make of that, to be honest, because the next day it could be completely something different. And yeah, sorry.
It's fascinating that I don't know if this would be as meaningful for you guys, but Nigel Farage in the UK, Reform UK is like MAGA UK style, and he is Trump's buddy. Nigel Farage, he was at rallies with Trump, he's a big fan, but today there's this footage that's come out, and Nigel Farage is absolutely on the money here. He says, if this part, just a short clip here that says that, look, if we're serious about getting Ukraine and Russia to the table, Ukraine has to be part of NATO. Or he says it's probably essential that Ukraine joins NATO. 100% correct there. And I don't see there's any other way around it. But yeah, we're just going to be in this kind of stasis that if there are no security guarantees that are either NATO or equivalent to NATO, and, you know, what could be equivalent to NATO unless you form an alternative NATO, which is a massive undertaking in itself, then we're not going to get anywhere. They absolutely have to have security guarantees. Ukraine will not agree to have a ceasefire and stop and down tools because Russia can just attack them again. So you have to have an absolutely steadfast deterrent that will stop Russia attacking again. And it's either going to be NATO. There are some saying that an expedited accession to the EU could give some security guarantees to Ukraine as well. I don't know how realistic that is.
So the thing is, that could, in theory, work, but the EU will need to do some reforms as well, because there is no real security guarantees in the EU right now. There are some agreements about military cooperation, but there is no Article 5 in the EU. It could be an alternative down the road, but what I think people need to understand is there's not going to be peace negotiation in May that is going to result in a ceasefire in the summer, which was projected by the US, right? That is absolutely unrealistic and unserious. Maybe they have aims to have maximalistic goals from their point of view, the US point of view. And that's why they're going out this hard right now. I think it is, unfortunately, based on ignorance. not understanding what the conflict is about, how it works, how the reality is on the ground, and how security guarantees actually work. I don't think they understand it. That's my personal opinion.
Michael Maffoul, the former ambassador to Russia, said we don't need to make NATO membership a subject for negotiating a negotiated settlement. That's not what should be negotiated over. That's a subject for NATO to decide, not Putin. And that's my point. It's like, it's up to NATO. The problem is when you've got these NATO nations, like the US for a start, just automatically saying, well, Ukraine can't join. It's really frustrating. Diplomacy 101 says, again, Michael McFaul, don't give anything without getting something in return. Don't negotiate in public, which is what Hegseth and Trump did yesterday. Don't negotiate about Ukraine's future without first coordinating your position with Ukrainians. 100% in agreement there. A few other things. Well, in fact, we probably should really move towards some comments here. There's a lot of comments. Goose Springsteen's been very, very prevalent. So quickly go through some of these. The root of this is that we took a holiday from history. I presume he means Europe. We thought that we could have influence without strength by relying on the US even after Trump won. Weakness means you don't get a seat at the table. Like I said, the weakness is because it happened because it was beneficial for us to be militarily weak. In other words, we spent money on other things, and that was because the US was happy to spend more money and to help secure Europe because it's in their best interest. But variables change, and now times have changed, and now we need to spend more, and America wants to spend less. So I get a little bit frustrated when it's like, oh, the UK's been weak, the UK's been weak, or the US has been, Europe's been weak. Yeah, no, you could say that actually we've been strong in spending money on other things that were at the time very much, arguably, you can make a very good case that they were much more to the benefit of our populations during that time. So not spending an extra 20 billion on the military every single year from 1970 to now, or whatever, I'm making stuff up here, means that all that money was spent on things like hospitals and education and pensions and whatever, and that has put our population in a better position. So it's easy to say we should have spent 20 billion every year on the military, but we didn't, and actually we didn't for good reason at the time. But now the situation has changed, so things have to change. Anyway, that's just my pet peeve about that. Goose, and thank you, Goose. I think we've just gone through that, haven't we? So I just want to say thank you from Niels Clement. 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships are really, really very kind. And same with Kevin Forst as well, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Super, super generous. Johnny Nedregard, really appreciate that. I don't know if you guys have any insight as to what's going on with the sanctions imposed on Poroshenko. So this is the one of the opponents, previous president to Ukraine. Now he's being done for treason by the Ukrainian government today. It seems really bad optics and divisive to happen now. Do you guys have any insight on that?
I personally don't have any insights in that. I just want to add something, if you allow, to the question before.
Yeah, sure.
Regarding, yeah. So I completely agree with you that things might have been a little bit different here in Europe before Russia launched its full-scale invasion. However, it's also true that some countries, or most countries, I mean, Poland did, the Baltics did, but most of the European countries didn't wake up after 2014. And yeah. I don't know, Russia invading Crimea should have been the biggest wake-up call for all of our countries here, that we should spend definitely billions more in defense every year. And nearly nobody did, and pretty much everyone completely ignored it. And I mean, imagine how much time we had to prepare for the situation just until 2022, right? I mean, that's 8 years. Yeah,
and you're absolutely right. And Goose, you know, it's not to be completely one side or the other, but because there are nations that still aren't, NATO nations that still aren't paying even 2% of GDP on defense. And you know, the further, in fact, the Financial Times did an interesting analysis of the further away from Moscow you get, the less people are spending on defense. And so there is that the kind of perception that, hey, Spain and Portugal are like, yeah, we're all right, Jack, because we're on the other side of Europe, so we're not going to spend so much. And there's an element of free riding there. So yeah, there definitely is, like, Europe hasn't spent enough on defense. when they should have done previously, amongst particular nations especially, but also there are reasons why we haven't, just in a more general sense. But yes, sorry, you're absolutely right. And another question here from, so I don't think we have any particular insight on Poroshenko at the moment. It's something to keep an eye on, whether it's just pure political shenanigans from the Zelensky government trying to get rid of an opposition member, or whether he has, like the accusations are that he has taken coal from occupied Luhansk, that he's got chocolate factories open in Russia, that he's making money out of Russia whilst at the same time, trying to be president of Ukraine. So if that's true, then there's some problems there. Goose Springsteen asked, and this is for Erlend, what is Norway's military industrial base like? What are the areas of expertise? Do energy costs facilitate expansion? I remember being impressed to hear that Penguin missile developed in the 1970s. Just very quickly on that, where are the strengths of Norway?
Well, aerospace, maritime, and munitions, it's pretty big. Kongsberg, of course, is the biggest company building air defense systems, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, lots of maritime systems, very high-tech stuff. There are also lots of USV stuff going on, so unmanned sea vehicles. So.
Yeah. And that's why Norway are in the capability coalition for the maritime with UK. So we're both sort of naval nations.
Yeah. By the way, there's a very high possibility that Norway's or Kongsberg and some of the technology Norway had has been transferred to Ukraine with regards of the USVs, because as today, the Minister of Defense revealed that we have for a while been providing Ukraine with drone technology for both air and sea. So
wow.
If you go and look at the Kongsberg maritime website, you find something that have some resemblance to some of those USVs that Ukraine is using. So that's interesting.
And before we go on to the question for German aid, Stephen Bendal from Norway, who's got a Ukrainian wife, and he's been out. I meant to interview him when he was in Kiev, but we couldn't get the tech working. It's time for Norway to give 100 billion kroner in aid to Ukraine right now, finance production in Ukraine. And he also, and thanks so much for this, by the way, Stephen, it's more important for European security to have Ukraine in NATO than the US.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Ukraine has the most professional, strongest land army in the world right now. So if there is an end to the war and Ukraine gets to keep some of that armed army and also train Western forces, I don't think there's anything that we could learn more from and that could secure and contribute to our security than that. And looking
100%.
forward in the Baltics, we're struggling to field a few brigades in the Baltics to secure their border, right?
That said, I mean, the US is still a very important member of NATO, of course. Stephen also says Europe must stand up and take responsibility for our own security. We should never rely on the US. It's fine if they turn up, but don't count on it. Ouch. So back to German aid. So one for GAU. How realistic is it politically for Germany to provide peacekeeping troops without a US commitment? I think you've already said that it's unlikely to happen. But yeah, is Germany ready to take independent action, or is it too against Atlanticist thought?
So I didn't mean it in a way that it's not going to happen. I meant in a way that it would be interesting to know how many troops we are actually contributing. I mean, the official point of view or the official standpoint from Germany right now is that Germany will definitely take part in peacekeeping, or more specific in a way to secure peace in Ukraine relative to our economic strength. That's the official standpoint or the official point of view. The question is, when, let's say, there are 100,000 or 200,000 troops needed, what Erlend said, I don't think Germany could even provide, in addition to our NATO obligations, like the brigade in Lithuania, for example, could even send like 30, 40, 50,000 soldiers to Ukraine. I mean, our army is not even that big, to be honest, that we could just send so many people out in Ukraine. And I think that's a big issue. I think we will definitely take part with or without the US, if that's going to happen, definitely. But probably not as big as a lot of people wish.
Some great support here for the channel, Julian Rossiter, and Surprise It's Us. Thanks, Lynn, for the ATP Geopolitics memberships, and Richard Demi as well. Really appreciate that, Richard. And I love this for Doris. For those who don't know, I use Doris all the time as my moral examples, and she's always getting beaten up on the other side of the road, or getting her house invaded, or just like Doris has such a torrid time of it. And so people definitely feeling sorry for poor old Doris. And I should probably give her a bit of a break. Hashtag free Doris. Michael Vucher, thank you, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships as well. That's really kind of you. And then we have Goose Springsteen again. I think without Trident defense, so that's our nuclear deterrent in the UK, spending is 1.5%. The problem with pooling capability is it needs aligned foreign policy. For Nordics, it's possible, but Germany and France have too many disagreements. My thoughts on this is that that's an interesting point about we have much more nuclear expenditure in the UK and UK MOD, where other countries won't have that, because only France and Europe have nuclear weapons. So that's an interesting dynamic. We provide nuclear support for Europe, essentially, and obviously the Americans do too. But that's something to take into account. Also, yeah, Germany and France may have too many disagreements, but actually it's France and many in Europe now calling for a closer, more integrated armed forces, maybe a sort of European armed services there that could overcome those disagreements by, forcing integration and having alignment there. What are your thoughts on the possibility or probability or plausibility of European armed forces? No.
Yeah, when Erlend doesn't want to start. So I don't really have thoughts on that. I'm not a really big fan of like a combined European army, to be honest. So I can't really say something to that. I just want to add something regarding my last statement. When it comes to the US, a lot of people shouldn't forget what Merz, so the CDU chancellor candidate, who very likely becomes the next chancellor here in Germany after the elections in a week. And he always, since months and months and months, when it, for example, comes to Taurus, he always says we need to take our look away from the US and towards our European neighbors. Friedrich Merz wants to very closely coordinate on Ukraine defense, but also on European defense with the UK, with France, and with Poland. And so when people are saying, yeah, but when the US doesn't want to do that, and what about Germany? I think when Merz will be the leader here in Germany, there will be a drastic change in how dependent Germany will be on US decisions. Not like Scholz, for example, always covering up with Biden and basically just doing the same. Friedrich Merz, in my opinion, although I don't like him a bit, will definitely do otherwise. He will definitely talk a lot more to the European neighbors like the UK, France, or Poland, and decide with them together on these things. So I don't think that Germany will look so much up to the US after the elections.
That's a really interesting point. Thanks, matey. So I just want to, there's a couple here. Ukraine quickly joining the EU is tricky because of the common agricultural policy. EU farmers will go crazy at the threat of the cheaper Ukrainian produce. That's absolutely right. I don't disagree with that at all. There are definitely some bumps in the road to Ukraine joining the EU. But they are jumping through those hoops, and it is going more quicker than people were anticipating, especially since they are actually at war, which is a question for you guys as Tochnyi members. A question for Tochnyi: could you make a report on European military industry scaling up from 2022 to 2025? A list of what has been done and what's in the future would help a lot with conversations on EU capabilities. So somebody asking you guys to thanks, my 2 cents, by the way. Can you do a bit of work in putting together a report? But that obviously would be interesting.
I mean, it would be very, very happy to jump on that task, but please give me a team of 15 people that are fully employed. But there, fortunately, is a report that is called the Military Balance, which is delivered by the IISS. So that is possible. It is quite pricey, but it is possible to buy that report.
Yes, indeed. Let's have a look at that. So the IISS Military Balance is an annual publication by the International Institute for Strategic Studies that provides an authoritative assessment of military capabilities and defense economics worldwide. It covers 170. That's the one that, yes, that's one that Perun has used, and it gives different ways of being able to compare units across countries. And I'm sorry, I'm waffling now, but that is, I've never read it, and obviously I presume you have to then pay for it, as you say, but it is there for people if you want it. So there is such a thing. Interesting. Okay, onwards and upwards. Thanks, by the way, my 2 cents. Okay, we're almost at the end of the questions, guys. You'll be happy to know. Goose Springsteen again. A big risk for NATO before 2030 is a Russian Baltic incursion to create a land corridor to Kaliningrad. It could be done quickly enough to make it a fait accompli and to undermine trust in Article 5. Right. The larger question I have for you guys is, what do you realistically think the chances are of Russia ever going on past Ukraine or doing anything? Because I think that their conventional armed forces, certainly the ground forces, have been so fundamentally attrited. It wouldn't be possible for them to contemplate that for many, many years to come, especially if they can't, and I don't think they can completely overcome Ukraine. So Ukraine will still exist there. There'll just be some kind of hybrid version of Ukraine if Russia got the upper hand. But what are your thoughts on further incursions?
So let's say that this is the worst case scenario, but presume that Ukraine is forced somehow through the a certain domino effect in Europe, which will suffocate the military support to Ukraine, and the US basically forcing Ukraine to settle an agreement with Russia. Russia has a very sizable army, combat experience, and let's say that a hypothesis that one of the agreements that Russia will or concede, one of the things that they will concede is that they will pull out half of the fighting force from the occupied territories. With the situation that Russia is in now, where so much of their economy is relying on the military industry, I don't think they can just disband those soldiers. I think that will be very scary for the current regime in Russia, and also might cause some sort of economic collapse. I do think that is probably the goal for the regime. I think they are looking for this because we are not capable in Europe to defend that piece of territory if we don't have US security guarantees. Unfortunately, I don't think we will be able and willing to do what it takes to defend those countries in a timely manner without getting ourselves into an absolutely massive land war, which I do think we will win, but it will be incredibly costly. And I think, unfortunately, that is probably one of the end goals that the crazy people in the Kremlin is aiming for.
Thanks for that. And GAU, any thoughts on, because I know the Germans and the Poles have both come up with reports on how, and they put different time scales on this about how how Russia might continue, could attack, I think, so the Germans or was it the Poles said 6 years and one of them said 3 years, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there are different thoughts on how much time could pass until Russia is ready to take a NATO member. First of all, our reports, as far as I know, are not about how many years would have passed until Russia starts war with NATO, rather than how much time would pass until Russia starts a small military operation or a military operation against a small region within NATO, like, for example, taking over a specific part of the Baltics and stuff like that. They're very, would you say in English, there are controversial studies on that, where you would say, okay, it's about 2 years, maybe 3 years. There are studies on this where we say, okay, we have about 5 to 8 years, completely depending. And I honestly don't know how realistic that is. I think as the same as Erlend, that I don't think that Russia would win this war after all. But Russia might get motivated to just trying it to take over the Baltics, or I don't think Poland is a good idea, but maybe the Baltics, when they see how weak the US and the European NATO members are working together. When, for example, Trump works out a peace deal for Ukraine, which is not very beneficial, like no security guarantees and all that kind of stuff. And they drew out most of their attention from Europe and just focus on overseas, like Taiwan and China or Israel. Then I think that Russia might get motivated to actually trying something like this. And this would be completely different. So I think a lot of that actually depends on how the next year basically in Ukraine works out.
Yeah.
Can I just add that in some way the Russians are forced to pursue this maximalist goal because they've devastated their own country and their own economy to a degree where I think they probably assess that one of the only ways they can survive as a country, they will have to pursue these maximalist goals, probably trying to take over certain parts of the Baltics, demotivating the European resilience and unity before going back into Ukraine and trying to take over the whole country. And if we even get close to that, Ukraine will have very, very big problems defending itself in 3 to 5 years from now. I think we're looking at a lot shorter time scale because Russia is in a hurry. I think the Russians are in a real hurry to save their own country because, frankly, I don't see any chances of Russia not spiraling down to an absolutely terrible economic disaster in a few years.
Agreed. Mark Biscu, such a great supporter of the channel. Thanks, matey. Mark and Oliver. Perhaps Kursk should remain Ukrainian, as so many Ukrainian soldiers fought and died there. Whatever deal Putin and Trump come up with, Ukraine still has to accept it. And of course, that's not just Zelensky accepting it. There's an element of like the population needs to be behind whatever deal there is. And Zelensky's previously talked about how, exactly that he would have to pass things through the Ukrainian people. They will not take a bad deal ever again. Yeah, absolutely agree, Mark. What goes on with Kursk is going to be interesting. How much they can get for Kursk. The prevailing idea, as far as I see it, is that Kursk square kilometers are worth many more square kilometers for Ukraine. As in, like, you could swap, I don't know, I'm making stuff up now, but you could swap 1 square Kursk kilometer for 3 square Zaporizhia square kilometers. I would have thought something like that. I don't know, but that's my idea. just quickly going on, if you guys don't have anything to say, but thanks, Mark. It's absolutely really pertinent points about Ukraine still having to accept these plans. It's going to be interesting to see what happens if either side doesn't accept part of the negotiation, how the US, if they are the ones that are still going to be mediating this, how they will treat one side refusing to accept a plan. Thank you to Richard Bennett with ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thanks to XPenguin95 that has my NATO badge in the avatar there. Very kind of you. And Wizard of Ooze saying Doris needs her own NATO patch. I agree. We have the final Goose Springsteen one here. Kaufman, so Michael Kaufman, the analyst, makes a point that the Russians lost a professional yet doctrinally misguided force in the course of the war, but has replaced it with one adept in a blunt yet effective way of war. They are improving. Yep, the Russians are improving, but they have lost an awful lot as well. They are adapting, but adapting with a poorer force in many ways across the the larger spectrum of the armed forces. There will be pockets of very good adaptation and capability. Any thoughts on where the Russian armed forces are at the moment, guys? Never underestimate them, of course.
I think they are incredibly dangerous, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's a massive army. It's certainly not very professional in every step, but of the ladder. But there are some really battle-hardened, experienced soldiers there, and there's a lot of them, unfortunately. And also, they've learned how to fight in this specific way of modern warfare, which is in Ukraine with the high density of drones and artillery systems.
Yeah, blunt yet effective, I think, as mentioned. And my 2 cents still on the Tochnyi report. Delegate the list to Perun and have him presented at Tochnyi. I know the companies don't give exact numbers, but an educated estimation would do it. Be interesting to see what the report, the IISS report, how much that costs and what's detailed in there. That might be the first place to look. Right, so and thank you so much for everyone in the live chat. It's absolutely amazing. I just want to just before we go, guys, because I know you guys have been here far too long, I'm sure, just a few things to just go on about the Trump and Hegseth rhetoric from yesterday. Former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton has slammed Trump's call with Putin, saying he effectively surrendered to the Russian leader. Quote, Putin couldn't be happier. They're drinking vodka straight from the bottle in the Kremlin. A big day for Moscow. I don't disagree there. Phillips O'Brien, the analyst, says the fate and freedom and democracy in Europe will now rest entirely in the hands of Europeans. So far, they have not been up to the challenge of defending it. The question is whether they will be now, or whether European freedoms will go gently into the good night. And Phillips O'Brien, he's from Boston. He's an American analyst in St Andrews University in Scotland. He has his own Substack that he wrote a very prescient piece, what Europe can do in a worst case scenario. And he wrote this back in December, but actually it's now really, really relevant with what was said yesterday. Conclusion, Trump will move very quickly, maybe trying to enact parts of the plan before being inaugurated. He will start with the immediate cessation of US aid for Ukraine. He will pressure Ukraine to cede large amounts of territory to Russia. He will either partially or even totally lift the sanctions on Russia. He will negotiate respectfully with Putin and suspiciously with Zelensky. Wow. He's pretty much got all of that right, apart from we wait to see the sanctions. So what Trump has never said, which a number of proposed Trump peace plans argue he will do, is, so maybe he will promise more US aid for Ukraine if Russia rejects a peace deal, make Russia cede any occupied territory, allow Ukraine into NATO. It's not going to happen. Give Ukraine another type of security guarantee by the USA. It's not going to happen. Press for Ukraine to be let into the EU, maybe. But of course, he's not saying that that's what Trump would do, but what some people are saying he might do, and so on and so forth. Really interesting article on his Substack. I suggest you guys go and watch that. Now, it was really interesting to hear, as I mentioned, people come out straight after this rhetoric and talk. John Healey, the Secretary of Defense for the British MOD, came out and said, we need to put, Ukraine's voice must be at the heart of any talks, and we need to put them in the best possible position to secure a lasting peace through strength. So this is basically politely but quite obviously being against the American rhetoric. And interestingly, we heard that from all sorts of people as well. including, all of that I wanted to speak about. So the Weimar Plus statement, which very much says exactly that. So you've got European leaders coming out quite robustly there. In the UK, it's interesting. Our Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, was incredibly forcefully supportive of Ukraine in Parliament. We've got the former, so this is a Conservative, former Secretary of Defence, Grant Shapps, also being very pro-Ukraine. We've got the leader who went for the leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, James Cleverly, starting the negotiation by setting out what one side should give up is not a strong move. Giving the impression that invasion pays off is not a strong move. Regimes are watching closely. Let's send a message that violence and aggression don't win out. I stand with Ukraine. So we've got right across the political spectrum. That's three parties in the UK being very against what the US was saying yesterday and very for Ukraine. So I found that pretty interesting in the UK, but certainly more to say about that. And also it's worth noting that Canada, Chrystia Freeland, has come out very strongly at the Liberal Party in support of Ukraine and putting down. She said Canada stands steadfast with Ukraine and the brave people of Ukraine who are at the front lines and fighting against tyranny. It's in the interest of all democracies to support them. Ukraine must become a full NATO member. So there's a NATO member calling for Ukraine to be a NATO member. So strong positions against what the American positioning is, which is pitting, I think, Europe against America in quite an interesting way. It's going to be a very fascinating next couple of weeks. What are your kind of final thoughts, guys, on these ideas and the US's positioning and the rest of the world's positioning?
Well, if I can start, I would like to say that it's very dangerous the way that the US is doing diplomacy out in the open, and also disregarding all the principles that we have agreed upon after the end of the Second World War. It's incredibly dangerous, and what I'm scared of is that some countries that are very important for the sanctions to be upheld, etc., will basically fall into the a domino effect from this. That could lead to a situation where Ukraine loses the war, unfortunately, and I'm scared of that. I do think, though, that Europe is going to continue to support, and hopefully will ramp it up because it is very necessary right now.
Any thoughts, Gal?
But
No.
I have a question to GAU, because there is an announcement today, and I think you should get 1 minute to talk about that, because it's a very cool announcement.
You mean the Hellwing drones?
Yeah, since you're German aid to Ukraine, at least one German aid thing should be talked about, no?
Yeah, I talked about this in my a lot in my military aid videos. So yeah, these are the HX2 drones.
I'm so sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah,
is that no? That's fine. No, go for it.
It's fine. What have you said, Jonathan? Do you know what you have said about them?
So I went through the Hartpunkt article, the English translation thereof, to talk, or no, it might be in the Helsing article, to talk about what they can do, and talked about you saying, no, it's Hartpunkt, you saying that the funding hasn't actually been agreed on that yet. So basically going through, I talked through your post as well as describing what these are.
Yeah, that's all I would say about them. They have announced that they're producing them for Ukraine and delivering them to Ukraine. As far as I know, and the Bild article about them actually confirmed my information, is that this is part of the 3 billion euro package, which is currently under discussion. But as everyone knows, it's under discussion or under negotiations. The Chancellery is currently blocking it. So it's not agreed on. The money isn't there, so the drones are not funded. If they are delivering them to Ukraine, then they're paying for itself as of right now. And they're probably hoping that the new government would then approve the funds but that will take months. So yeah, it might be just an announcement to put some pressure on the chancellery right now, or on the government in general. But yeah, we will see, right? I don't think they will be added to the weapon deliveries list managed by or published by the German government. As I said, it's the funding isn't there. It's not secure.
These are very useful looking drones. They can go to a range of 100 kilometers. They've got I think a terminal velocity speed of about 220 kilometers per hour. They are resilient to electronic warfare. They use satellite mapping to get reference points. So if they're kind of jammed, then they can still find their target, as long as the satellite mapping they've got loaded is recent and decent. And they can be fitted with different types of munitions. These look like and they've been designed from the ground up to be cheap as well. So this looks like the perfect marriage of all of these different variables that makes them potentially a very good investment for Ukraine.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, when everything actually works out, that will be a huge contribution, especially since Ukraine will get a decent amount of them in very short time. I mean, as far as I know, if I recall correctly, they produce about 1,000 per month, which is a decent number for such a high value loitering munition. But yeah, we have to see. As I said, it could probably be, which is very weird in my opinion, just be in PR announcement or an announcement to put pressure on the government. Nothing more. We will see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that. Just two things. Little whiskey shop. That's Mark. I went to Ukraine with my 2 pence. My tuppence. Forget NATO whilst Trump is in. Form a new European alliance with Ukraine once peace has been agreed. Up the GDP spend and bring back conscription. Lots of ideas there. I don't know how popular that would be in the UK. Things like conscription, but I don't disagree that's not. But just practically, it'd be interesting to see that try to get pushed through. However, I wonder whether this kind of Weimar Plus group of countries, there's already been this talk about the coalition of the willing, whether that is something that's genuinely could have a chance of taking place, and that you might well have a kind of alternative to NATO. I don't know how much work has been done on that, but you've already had that Weimar Plus statement, so they're almost positioning themselves as a new group. These countries of Italy, Poland, some of the Nordics, and Germany, and etc. UK. So yeah. Interesting times. Carolyn says, and thank you very much for the super chat, does the Ukrainian constitution permit president or parliament to give away Ukrainian land to another country? I don't know, but I wonder if this is, some people have put this idea that Ukraine could give away a bunch of land to a NATO country, so that like Poland suddenly has control over, Dnipropetrovsk, right? So then Russia invades Dnipropetrovsk, then it triggers Article 5. It's a kind of a creative answer to the problem. I don't know if that's realistic at all, but I don't have any particular knowledge of that question. You guys?
No, we would have to ask a Ukrainian lawyer probably.
But I love some of these creative solutions to these big problems. Well, look, guys, before you go, I want to say thank you very much, obviously, for being here. I just want to share this last. This is. Oh, and by the way, thank you very much. Goodness me, they keep coming in. Chris as well. Chris R. Really appreciate that, Chris. And Johnny Christensen, some Danish love there. Really appreciate your support always. Thanks to everyone in the live chats. Really, really great for you. Before I play this video, I absolutely love this video. This is Malcolm Turnbull, the previous Prime Minister for Australia, at a Q&A show back a couple of years ago, talking about Donald Trump and his love for Putin that he saw firsthand. So it's always worth understanding what Donald Trump believes and feels from a personal point of view. Like he went in 2018 to the Helsinki press conference after this meeting with Putin, where no one was there apart from Putin and a single translator, and he came out and regurgitated every single Putin talking point and capitulated to Putin over his own intelligence services. So he's got, as Erlend said earlier, this proximity bias where he listens to the last person that spoke to him very much. But if that person is a strongman dictator, and we know that Trump really kind of wants to be that kind of person, that hot mic where he's talking about Kim Jong-un from North Korea. We know that Donald Trump loves a dictator. He speaks much more passionately about Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, Viktor Orban, Jair Bolsonaro, all of these kind of real strongmen dictators or dictator wannabes, autocrats, than he's never said anything nice about democratically elected leader that I can remember in the history of Donald Trump. You tell me a time that he has absolutely swooned, said nice things about democratically elected leaders, and I don't think you'll find it. So we're going to play that in a second. But is there anything you guys wanted to say before we play that out?
Well, he speaks like he speaks positively about Giorgia Meloni, but she's a fascist, so
There you go. Yeah, a really strong right-wing leader in Europe. So yeah, that's the only democratically elected leader actually. But so it's interesting. That's a really good point actually. Yes. So I just want to say before I play that video, thanks to you guys for coming on. I know it's been quite a long one. Really appreciate your support. This is a very important subject. We're going to see how this develops over the weeks and months, and whether the US will be able to sustain their position as mediator, or whether they'll be rejected by maybe Ukraine, maybe Russia as well, in trying to bring about an unrealistic end to this war. We shall see. But yes, Germinade, anything to add?
No, not really.
Cool beans. Okay, well, we'll have our final words. So I just want to play this. Can you hear this?
When you see Trump with Putin, as I have,
can you hear that?
Yep.
Cool. Okay.
When you see Trump with Putin, as I have on a few occasions, he's like the 12-year-old boy that goes to high school and meets the captain of the football team. My hero. It is really creepy. It's really creepy. Now,
and that struck you at the time.
Oh, absolutely. It struck everybody. It was like you could touch it. It was creepy. The creepiness was palpable.
Are you trying to say they're having a bromance?
No, I'm not saying. I'm just telling you what I saw. Regrettably, the Republican Party under Donald Trump, and particularly the right wing of the Republican Party, are very sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. I mean, I've been with Trump and Putin. Trump is in awe of Putin. Tyrants are often popular. You see, the key to democracy, liberal democracy, is that it empowers the majority, but it also, through the rule of law, constrains the majority. And if you get to the point where anybody who can muster a majority, and I don't think Trump can do that, by the way, but anyone who can muster a majority is given absolute power and then can do whatever they like to the minority, that's not a democracy. That is a tyranny. That is an autocracy. Even if it's got the support of 51% of the population, that is not what makes a democracy. A democracy, as we understand it, is one where the rule of law protects all citizens and the rule of law applies to all citizens, whether they're the president or the prime minister or an ordinary, elector.
And honestly, how incredible that is, because at the moment, Donald Trump is trying to undermine all of those rules of law, the checks and balances that keep him in check, or as an autocrat wannabe. And what's fascinating there is you've got Malcolm Turnbull saying, I saw it with my own eyes. The man fawns over Vladimir Putin. It's creepy. He said, it was creepy. I was there. The guy loves himself some Vladimir Putin. So when you understand, and that was several years ago that he recorded that was recorded. But when you understand that that's who Donald Trump is, then you start understanding why we've heard what we've heard in the last 24 hours. I think that is incredibly important, that interview there. Is that something either of you had heard before?
I've seen the video, so I've heard it before, but it is very, very concerning, and I think it's a madman's syndrome or something like that.
No, he probably sees Putin as a big, strong guy, right, who poses everyone and just gets his will when he wants to, and he rules this country with a hard iron fist. I think Trump likes it, right? So,
yeah, and it doesn't sort of bode well really for Ukraine. So, well, we'll keep supporting Ukraine, of course, and the wonderful people out there supporting this channel as well are like-minded. So, I want to thank both of you guys for coming on today. Really, really do appreciate it. I love speaking to you. I don't do it enough. You guys got so much to say, and it's really great that Erlend, you've been out into Ukraine a couple of times in January and supporting in a way that you do, and the tireless work that German Aid to Ukraine does with the website that details everything that Germany is doing in terms of supporting Ukraine. You guys are stalwarts, real cornerstones of what Tochnyi do and what Tochnyi stand for. So thank you very, very much for being here. Any last words from you?
Just thank you for bringing us on, and thank you for what you're doing every day. That is very impressive, and I see that there's a lot of donations coming in, and I'm just happy that there's a very strong community around what you created here.
Yeah, it kind of blows me away sometimes. Well, every day, all the time, and I can't wait to start our next campaign as well. We're sort of supporting at the moment. I think it's in the description below. Supporting the Ukrainian campaign, while our next NATO campaign is just getting sorted out at the moment. I know that we had Chris J in the thread earlier, who's going to be looking at creating our patches for us. The last patch I have, which is up there, is amazing. Absolutely love it. And then we'll do another Car for Ukraine one. We're also going to help Jiggers Poor. So we're looking at really, really helping out some of these awesome charities. But yeah, thanks, man. German Aid, any last words?
Yeah, just saying thank you for having me. You know, I always come back when you ask me, always come on when you ask me, and I'm always glad to be here. Always a nice audience. And yeah, this time not a very German specific talk, so I probably didn't have to contribute so much, but still glad I was here, and thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, no, and thanks for all your contributions. They have been absolutely brilliant. As people are saying, really, really valuable. Great guests. Really appreciate you guys and everyone else out there. Stay on the line, guys. In the meantime, thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your support. Thanks for the lively live chat. You guys are amazing. And I will speak to you, no doubt, about 35 times tomorrow. The problem is my brain is like those browser tabs. It's just I'm a browser full of like 8,000 tabs, and as soon as those tabs go into my head, I have to get them out to you guys. I'm like, otherwise, like, I can't sleep. So you don't have to watch all my videos, but I do produce a lot of videos. So yeah, sorry, not sorry. Anyway, take care, y'all, and I'll see you soon. In the meantime, Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.